The first thing I heard before I saw him was the click. Soft, metallic, deliberate. It came from behind the velvet curtain at the rear of Belladonna, where the private tables sat in a pool of amber light and old money. The dining room around me still moved the way it always did on Friday nights, crystal chiming, forks against porcelain. Men laughing too loudly because other men were watching, but the sound behind that curtain made the room feel staged. Like everyone was performing normal in the shadow of something real. "Take the bottle and go," Carlo Leone said beside me. I kept my hand around the neck of the Barolo so tightly my fingers hurt. "You said Leela could clear Section 3. His mouth flattened. Carlo had a face made for polite cruelty. Smooth hair, expensive suit, the kind of smile that arrived only when someone else was about to lose something. "Leela cried in the bathroom for 10 minutes after you dumped water on Councilman D'Amato's son. So yes. She can clear Section 3. He had his hand up her skirt. And now," he said softly, leaning closer so no one else would hear, "you get to learn how expensive principles are." Through the curtain. The lighter clicked again. Everyone at Belladonna knew who took that table. Nobody said his name unless they had to. They said the back table the way church people said confessional. Like going there meant you came back different if you came back at all. My palms were slick. I looked across the room and found Leela standing near the bar with mascara-streaked cheeks, arms wrapped around herself. She shook her head before I even spoke. No. Not because she did not want to help me, because she knew. Carlo noticed my glance. "If you don't go in 30 seconds, I send her." That was how men like him always did it. They made fear communal. A thing that spread, I swallowed, my throat hurt. "No," I said. Carlo smiled. "Good girl." "No," I repeated, and this time I turned toward Leela. "They sent me, not her." The words came out quiet. They still seemed to startle him. Maybe because my hand was trembling so badly the spoon on the saucer rattled like tiny bones. Carlo's eyes hardened. "Go!" I pushed through the velvet curtain. The room behind it was smaller than I expected. Intimate, almost, dark walnut walls, a single oil painting of Naples at night, low light washing across white linen and cut crystal. The air smelled like smoke that had already died, starched cloth, expensive whiskey, and something colder beneath it. Night air on wool. 3 men stood around the walls without looking like guards, which only made them worse. Another sat at the far side of the room with a scar through one eyebrow and his hands folded. The man at the head of the table was alone with his drink. He looked up. I knew before anyone told me. Some people entered a room and gathered attention. He did the opposite. He made everything else fall away from it. Dante Salvator had a face too controlled to be called handsome first. It came after. The cut of the cheekbones. The mouth that looked mean until it moved and got meaner. Dark hair brushed back from a forehead lined not by age but by refusal. He wore a black suit with no tie. One hand rested near his glass. The other held the lighter, old silver scratched at the edges, flame snapped dead now, lid open. His eyes landed on the bottle in my hand, then on my face. Then very briefly on the spoon rattling against the saucer. Nobody spoke. I set the wine down and missed the coaster by an inch. "I'm sorry." My voice sounded unlike mine, too thin. "For what?" he asked. Not loud, not threatening, worse somehow, as if he did not need either. I looked at Carlo who had stayed just outside the curtain. Coward. "For the scene." "Which scene?" The room was so quiet I heard fabric shift when one of the guards breathed. "I threw water on a customer." "Why?" "Because he put his hand under Leela's dress." Because Carlo laughed. Because I'd been shrinking my whole life and something in me finally hated the shape of it. I opened my mouth, closed it. Dante watched me another second, then leaned back. "Come here," I did. Not because I wanted to, because every man in the room waited to see if I would. When I reached the table, he lifted his glass toward the chair opposite him. "Sit." Carlo made a soft noise of protest from the doorway. Dante did not look at him. The protest died anyway. I sat. My knees nearly gave under me first, which I hated. Dante's gaze dropped to my hands. "What's your name?" "Sophia." "Last name?" "Bellini." The scarred man at the wall shifted at that. So did Dante, but only in the eyes. You work here often, Sophia Bellini. I work in the pastry kitchen most nights. The floor when they're short. They sent a pastry girl to apologize for a floor problem. He turned his lighter over once, listening to the click when it shut. Interesting. Carlo stepped in at last, slick smile back in place. Mr. Salvetor, she's emotional, young. I meant only to teach her. Dante raised one finger. That was all. Carlo stopped speaking like his throat had been closed by a hand no one could see. Dante looked at me again. Are you afraid of me, Sophia? I should have lied. Even I knew that. You lied to powerful men if the truth embarrassed them. But the truth had slipped loose already tonight, and fear had a way of making me too honest in the worst moments. Yes, not a man in that room moved. Dante's eyes changed, not softened. That would have frightened me more. They sharpened like he had just heard the only thing in the room worth hearing. Of me, he said, or of what happens to girls men send into rooms like this. My breath caught. Nobody had ever asked me a dangerous question and left a place for the real answer inside it. I looked down because I couldn't do both, couldn't breathe and hold his eyes. The second one, the lighter clicked shut. The sound jumped under my skin. Carlo laughed too quickly. She's dramatic. Dante finally turned toward him. Are you telling me what she feels? No, sir. I only meant, you sent a terrified girl behind a closed curtain to entertain my temper. No, Dante stood. The whole room changed temperature. He was taller than I expected. Broader, not oversized. Just exact in a way that made violence feel architectural around him. Planned, load-bearing, Carlo took one step back. Mr. Salvetor, Dante moved past me. I smelled cedar and cold air and the faintest ghost of smoke from the lighter. He stopped close enough to Carlo that the other man had to tilt his chin up. Did you touch her? Dante asked. Carlo blinked. What? When you sent her in here shaking so hard the spoon announced her before she did. Dante's voice stayed quiet. Did you touch her? No, a beat. Dante nodded once to one of the men by the wall. Check the cameras. Carlo went white. Sir, that's not necessary. It wasn't a question. I sat frozen in the chair, heart kicking. The spoon was still trembling on the saucer beside my hand. I pressed my fingers around it to stop the sound. Dante looked back at me over his shoulder. His gaze landed there on my hand covering the spoon. Something unreadable crossed his face. Easy, he said. Then after one more look at the small violence my body was doing to itself, he added, shiver. The word hit me strangely. Not kind, not cruel, just seen. He turned to Carlo again. You're done on the floor tonight, Carlo stared. Sir? No, Dante's eyes never left his. You're done entirely. The scarred man moved for Carlo's arm. I stood too fast. Wait! Every head turned. That was the stupid part about terror. It sometimes shoved courage through before intelligence could stop it. Please, I said because my mouth kept moving. Don't if this is about me. Dante's face closed further. Sit down. I did not. I don't want anyone hurt because someone already was. That shut me up, not because he was louder, because he was right. He looked at the men near Carlo. Take him downstairs. Carlo began to speak, and then really began when he saw nobody was pretending anymore. The sound of it, fear stripped of polish, turned my stomach. Dante did not watch him go. He watched me. When the curtain fell back into place and the room sealed again, he returned to the table, picked up the bottle I had brought, and poured 2 fingers of wine into my untouched glass. I don't drink at work, I said. You don't work here anymore. The words landed without heat. Final, clean, I stared at him. What? You come with me. The lighter clicked once in his hand. And the door behind me locked. I did not go with him gracefully. That probably deserves to be said, since women in stories like this are always swept somewhere in silence, too stunned or too enchanted to object properly. I objected all the way from the back room to the alley entrance, where the night smelled like wet brick, car exhaust, fennel from the restaurant dumpsters, and rain that had not fallen yet. I have an apartment, I said as one of Dante's men opened the rear door of a black sedan. Not tonight. Dante stood beside the car with his coat unbuttoned, one hand in his pocket, as if kidnapping pastry chefs between dinner courses was a bureaucratic inconvenience. "I have work in the morning." "No, I'm not a witness." His eyes slid to me. "You are exactly a witness. To Carlo being awful." "The city is full of that." A corner of the scarred man's mouth twitched. It was the first sign I had seen that anyone in Dante Salvator's orbit possessed a face that moved. Dante noticed and looked at him. "Luca!" The expression disappeared. I crossed my arms over my chest because it felt like holding myself together manually. "Where are you taking me?" "Somewhere Carlo can't reach." "Why would he reach?" This time it was the woman near the front car door who answered. I had not noticed her until then, which felt like a professional failure on my part and proof of hers. She wore a charcoal coat, dark hair in a severe knot, and the kind of stillness that made me think of knives. "Because men who steal," she said, "do not enjoy loose ends." Dante looked at me. "Get in the car, Sophia." "No," a beat. He stepped closer, not enough to touch. Enough that the alley seemed to narrow around his coat, his height, the fact that nobody else in the space mattered while he was deciding something. "You slapped the son of a councilman," he said. "Then Carlo used you to test how much I already knew. If he thinks you heard anything, saw anything, or can identify anyone he's paid, you are now a problem to him." Problems get solved. The cold, awful thing was that I believed him. Still, "You can't just take me." He glanced at the apartment keys in my hand. "Would you rather I stand outside your building until dawn and wait for them to come?" I looked away. That answer was more frightening because of how practical it sounded. Not grand, not possessive. Just a calculation in which my survival had already been entered. "2 nights," I said. Dante opened the car door wider. "Tonight first." I hated that my body made the choice before my pride could. I got in. The inside of the sedan smelled like leather, wintergreen gum, and clean wool. Dante slid in across from me. The scarred man, Luca, took the front passenger seat. The woman with the knot drove. We moved. For 3 blocks, nobody spoke. The city passed in bright smears on the window, mulberry awnings, a church door, a couple kissing under scaffolding, a man walking 3 small dogs in sweaters like civilization had not already failed. Then my phone buzzed. I grabbed for it. Dante held out his hand. "No," I stared. "You can't mean that every time you say it. Give me the phone. It's probably Leela. Then she can worry for 10 minutes. It could be my landlord. Then he can evict you in the morning." That startled a breath out of me that almost became a laugh. It felt so wrong in that car I swallowed it back down. Dante's gaze sharpened as if he had heard the shape of it anyway. I handed over the phone. He powered it off and put it in his pocket with my entire evening attached to it. The woman driving spoke without looking back. "Giulia Ferrero," I blinked. "What?" "My name." "You've been staring at the back of my head like you're trying to guess whether I kill people for him." I flushed. "Do you?" She caught my eyes in the rearview mirror. "Only the ones who complicate my schedule." Luca snorted. 10 minutes later, the car turned through wrought iron gates into the courtyard of a brownstone, so elegant it made my apartment building feel theoretical. Narrow windows glowed gold. Stone lions flanked the steps. Somewhere nearby, I heard the low rush of the river. Inside, the house was all quiet money and locked history. Marble floors, dark wood. A chandelier that looked old enough to have opinions. The silence was the strangest part, not peace, containment. A woman in her 50s appeared in the hallway wearing an apron over a black dress and holding a wooden spoon like a courtroom exhibit. "You're late." "Good evening to you too, Maria," Dante said. Maria took one look at me, then at the tension in the hallway, then back at Dante. "Who's hungry and who's bleeding?" "Neither," Giulia said. Luca coughed into his fist. "Optimistic." Before I could decide whether to laugh again, another man barreled in from the side room carrying a leather case and smelling faintly of antiseptic and mint tea. He was handsome in a loosely assembled way, with wire-rimmed glasses, expensive sneakers, and the exhausted eyes of a man who knew too much about other people's emergencies. "I came because Giulia said there was blood," he said, then saw me. Oh, disappointing. I put on real pants for nothing. Nico, Maria said sharply. He put a hand to his chest. Maria, if you keep saying my name like that, I will continue to dream irresponsibly. Eat a vegetable and go to confession. Nico turned to me as if we had been abandoned together in a storm. You see what I suffer, daily emotional abuse, also gluten. Despite everything, I laughed. The sound seemed to surprise the room, me most of all. Nico pointed at me. Good. She's alive. She was always alive, Giulia said. Alive is biological, Nico replied. That was a personality indicator. Dante took off his coat. Enough, the room obeyed. It happened instantly. Like someone had drawn a line through the air, Maria clicked her tongue at me. You've eaten, I shook my head. Of course not, sit. Nico, move. Luca, if you drip blood on my floor again, I'll bury you in my basil. I'm not bleeding, Luca said. You always look like you might start. Maria swept me toward the kitchen before I could object. It was bigger than my apartment, warm from 2 ovens, copper pans hanging over a butcher block island polished by years of hands. I caught the scent of tomatoes cooked down slowly, butter, torn basil, lemon zest. My body recognized safety faster than my brain did. That might have been the most humiliating part. Maria set a bowl of pasta in front of me and a glass of water beside it. Eat. I'm not sure I can. Then twirl and pretend. She lowered her voice. Men like that mistake hunger for loyalty. Don't help them. From the doorway Dante said, I heard that. Good, Maria called back. Maybe it will make you tolerable. I looked up before I meant to. Dante was leaning against the frame, sleeves rolled once, watching me with the unreadable attention that had made the private room feel too small. I dropped my gaze to the pasta. You can sleep here tonight, he said. Tomorrow Giulia will take your statement. I don't have one. You do, you just don't know which parts matter yet. I twisted the fork without lifting it. And after tomorrow, depends. On what? On whether Carlo was freelancing, Giulia said from behind him, or reporting to someone bigger. I looked between them. And if he was, Dante's lighter clicked in his hand. Then your life has changed more than dinner service suggested. Later, when Maria showed me a guest room with a lock on the inside and windows overlooking black water. I stood by the bed and listened to the house settle around me. Somewhere below, a door shut. Somewhere farther off, a man laughed once and cut himself off too quickly. I should have slept. Instead, I stood at the window, hands cold on the sill, until I heard that lighter click in the corridor outside. Not entering, just there, once, then silence, a warning maybe. Or a promise that no one else would get through first. Dante, he had seen fear all his life, animal fear, strategic fear, the kind that lied, the kind that begged. The kind that weaponized itself to survive. But when Carlo threatened the other waitress, Sofia Bellini had shaken harder and stepped forward anyway. Fear had made her kinder. That was the first dangerous thing about her. I woke to the smell of espresso and the disorienting fact of clean sheets. For a full second, I forgot where I was. Then the memory came back in hard pieces. The velvet curtain, Carlo's face, Dante's hand around the lighter, Maria's kitchen. The river outside the window, and my body tightened before my mind finished the list. The room was too elegant to belong to panic. Pale walls, a wardrobe the size of my kitchenette, a chair upholstered in cream fabric nobody with a normal income would trust near coffee. I sat up and found a folded stack of clothes at the end of the bed. Black trousers, a white blouse, a soft gray sweater. New, my size. That was the second humiliating thing about being protected by dangerous men. They were efficient. Downstairs, the house was quieter than the restaurant had ever been. Morning light lay across the marble in long, cool bands. Somewhere, a radio played low Italian from the kitchen old enough to sound like memory. I followed the smell of coffee and sugar. Maria was at the stove. Nico sat at the island with a plate of dry toast and the expression of a man being punished by both God and nutrition. Luca leaned against the counter drinking espresso. Giulia stood with a tablet in one hand, speaking softly into an earpiece. Nobody looked entirely civilian, not even in daylight. Maria turned when she saw me. Sit. Nico lifted his toast. Observe. A funeral for pleasure. Maria slapped his shoulder with a dish towel. If you wanted eggs, you should have chosen better parents. I chose none, he said mournfully. And yet here I am, abandoned to fiber. I smiled before I could help it. Maria noticed and pretended not to. I took the stool farthest from everyone and wrapped both hands around the coffee she set before me. The heat steadied something. Dante, I asked before I could stop myself. Giulia glanced up. Meeting. The answer should have relieved me. It didn't. Luca studied me over the rim of his cup. He had the kind of face that seemed built from old loyalties, scar, square jaw, eyes that looked like they had seen too much and filed it properly. You bake, I nodded. Mostly pastry. Some bread. Show her the walk-in, Maria said. If she's staying more than today, I want to know if she's useful. Maria, Nico said, women are not appliances. Maria turned on him. And men are not children, but you still refuse zucchini. I nearly laughed coffee into my hand. The kitchen downstairs in the brownstone was not the main one. It was a working kitchen. Stainless steel counters. Fridges organized within an inch of military doctrine. Flour in labeled containers. Citrus stacked like jewels. I stopped walking when I saw the pastry drawer. Someone cared here, Luca noticed. Most people react to the gun cabinet first. There's a gun cabinet in the kitchen. There's a kitchen near the gun cabinet. He opened the refrigerator. Butter, eggs, cream, vanilla bean paste, blood oranges. Good chocolate, very good chocolate. I reached for a bowl automatically, then paused. Am I allowed? Luca shrugged. If Maria hits you, duck, so I baked. It was the only thing that made sense for a while. I separated eggs, melted chocolate over a water bath. Zested oranges so sharply the scent rose clean and bright through the room. As I worked, my breathing changed without asking me. Not calm exactly, but useful. My hands stopped betraying me. They remembered who they were. Giulia entered halfway through and watched me pipe mousse into small tart shells. You look different when you work. I forget to be afraid, I said. She considered that. Don't make a habit of it. What exactly am I in danger from? She set the tablet down. A man Carlo paid was found dead in Queens at 6 this morning. So. Several things. I nearly dropped the piping bag. Giulia watched the tremor return to my fingers. I didn't say that to be cruel. I said it because you should understand the scale. I nodded. She softened a fraction. Also because Mr. Salvatore will say less and expect you to infer more. Does everyone call him that? Unless we're trying to irritate him. Does that work? Nico appeared in the doorway with his toast still in hand. Beautifully, right up to the moment it doesn't. By noon, I had made 6 orange chocolate tartlets with a caramel shell, so thin it would crack under a spoon. Maria inspected one and grunted approval so grudging it felt like a medal. When Dante came in, the room altered the same way it had the night before. Not with drama, with compression. Giulia straightened. Luca set his cup down. Even Nico looked more employed. Dante's gaze moved once around the kitchen and stopped on the tray in front of me. What is it? He asked. Orange mousse, I said. Dark chocolate crust, burnt sugar top. He stepped closer. I became absurdly aware of my own wrists, the flour on my sweater, the streak of chocolate near my thumb. The way he watched things without seeming to blink much. Why burnt sugar? He asked. Because I had not meant to make something honest, and my hands had done it anyway. Because it looks strong, I said, keeping my eyes on the tray, but it cracks under almost no pressure. The room went still in a different way. Nico, traitor that he was, made a quiet little sound like a man witnessing gossip become art. Dante picked up one tartlet. And the orange, I swallowed. It keeps it from becoming only bitter. For 1 second too long, neither of us moved. That was the first real almost. Then he broke the caramel shell with the back of a spoon. The crack echoed lightly in the steel-bright kitchen. He tasted it, not greedily, carefully, as if tasting anything I made might tell him something he had not earned. His eyes lifted to mine. Good, he said. From him it landed harder than praise from other people ever had. Giulia's phone buzzed. She looked down, swore once under her breath, and turned the screen toward Dante. He read it and went still. "What?" I asked. Luca moved before either of them answered, crossing to a drawer beneath the counter, and taking out a handgun so naturally that my body went cold all over again. "Someone tried to poison the lunch delivery at the club," Giulia said. "Same kitchen route. 2 men are sick, 1 dead." I stared. "From food," she nodded once. Maria made the sign of the cross and then began barking orders at nobody visible. Dante looked at the tray in front of me. "Who had access to Belladonna's pastry inventory?" "Everyone in the kitchen," I said. "Porters, prep me." Carlo's office opened onto the back corridor. "You ever notice anything unusual?" I thought about the past 2 weeks. Crates delivered at odd hours. Carlo arguing with a man in a camel coat. My father's old recipe notebook gone from my apartment shelf one morning and back that night in the wrong place. I had told myself I was tired. "My notebook," I said. Dante's attention sharpened. "What notebook?" "My father's recipes. He used numbers in the margins, weights, timing, little corrections. Somebody moved it." Luca and Giulia exchanged a look. "Bring it," Dante said. "It's at my apartment." "Then we go now." He reached past me for the tray so Maria could cover it, and his hand brushed my wrist by accident. The contact was brief, barely skin. Still, every thought I had went white around it. He felt it too. I knew because his hand stopped for half a breath. Then he moved away. That was the second almost. Outside, the house had gone all hard edges and hurried footsteps. Giulia was already issuing instructions. Luca checked weapons. Nico muttered, "If anyone shoots at lunch, I am billing emotionally." I should have been terrified, I was, but beneath it another feeling had started. Smaller, worse, awareness. Dante held the kitchen door for me as if the world outside it was only weather. Someone was moving against him, and somehow, without understanding how, I had already been moved onto the board. We did not make it to my apartment first. Halfway downtown, Giulia got another call, and the convoy turned east instead, toward a stone church tucked between a florist and a legal office that probably laundered 3 kinds of guilt. Luca twisted in the front seat to look at Dante. They found Carlo. Dead hung in the air without being spoken. Dante only said, "Inside." "No." On the steps. The church belonged to the Salvators the way some things belong to old cities. Not officially, maybe, but everybody behaved as if it were true. Men in black coats already lined the entrance when we arrived. They parted for Dante before he reached the bottom stair. No one said his name. No one had to. Carlo lay under a gray sheet at the side of the steps, one hand visible, wedding band still on. Rain had finally started, making dark stars on the stone. Somewhere above us bells began to toll the hour. I stopped moving. It was Carlo exactly. It was the combination. Church bells, rain, covered body. Men standing very still around violence as if stillness made it holier. My stepfather had dragged my mother down church steps once after Mass because dinner was late. I had been 9. The bell rang while he did it. For years after, the sound made my lungs forget themselves. Now they forgot again. "Breathe," someone said. I couldn't. The bells struck once more, and the world narrowed to stone under my shoes, rain needling my hairline, the impossible urge to disappear inside my own ribs. Then Dante was in front of me. He put one hand lightly at the side of my throat, fingers against the racing pulse there, not gripping, only anchoring. "Look at me." I did because there was nowhere else left to go. "Not the bells," he said, voice low enough that the men around us became scenery. "Me." His hand was cool from the rain, steady. "Count," I stared. "With me, shiver." The nickname should have felt mocking. It didn't. Not with his thumb resting just below my ear, just enough pressure to keep me from floating off. "1," he said. I dragged air in. 2, I let it out. By 4, my vision stopped tunneling. By 6, my knees remembered how to be attached to me. Dante took his hand away first. That was the 3rd almost. Luca was watching us with an expression I couldn't read. Giulia was not watching at all, which felt more deliberate. "Inside," Dante said. The church interior smelled like candle wax and old wood, damp wool, lilies from some funeral not ours. Dante spoke with the priest in a side chapel, while Giulia and Luca took positions that looked casual if you had never seen a threat in your life. I sat in the back pew with my hands clasped too tight and watched rain move down the stained glass. Nico appeared beside me, somehow carrying an umbrella, a paper cup, and the same doomed relationship with carbohydrates. "I brought chamomile," he whispered. I looked at the cup. "In a church, I contain multitudes. You contain biscotti in your coat pocket," he sighed. "Maria planted that for the sake of my downfall." Despite myself, my mouth twitched. He lowered his voice further. "Pigeons are gathering outside." I blinked. "Why are you telling me that like it's sniper intel?" "Because they are violent opportunists with wings." He shuddered. "Do not laugh. I was attacked in Bologna at 12 and I still bear invisible scars." I did laugh that time, small and shocked out of me. Nico looked inordinately pleased. "Excellent. If you can laugh in a church full of armed Sicilians, you're adaptable." "What are you?" I asked. "Busy." Before I could ask another question, Giulia slid into the pew across from us. "We closed the fast question." I stared. "What?" "The immediate mystery," she said. "Why Carlo sent you in, why your notebook was moved. Why he suddenly cared whether you were visible to Dante." My stomach tightened. "And your father used coded measures in his recipes," she said. "Not numbers, routing marks, payment ratios. Carlo thought you knew what they meant." I looked between them. "I don't." "Probably not consciously," Giulia said, "but pattern memory is a thing. People hide what matters in what feels familiar. My father was a baker. He was also useful to men with cash they couldn't explain." The church suddenly felt colder. Dante returned then, rain darkening his shoulders, jaw locked harder than before. He stopped when he saw the expression on my face. "Tell her," I said. He glanced once at Giulia, who rose and moved away with Nico, leaving the pew opposite me empty. Dante sat. "I don't know what your father chose," he said. "I know he worked accounts through food supply fronts 15 years ago. Belladonna was one of them. If he hid something in those notebooks, Carlo wanted it before I did. My father died in a kitchen fire." "Yes." The yes was too careful. Something ugly moved through me. "You know more than that." He held my eyes. "Maybe," he said. I hated him a little for that answer, mostly because I understood it. Men like him traded in leverage, not comfort. "You can't keep doing that," I said. "What?" "Answering just enough to make silence feel like punishment." His gaze shifted, not away exactly, inward, there and not there for a beat. Then he reached for the back of the pew and I saw it, the white seam of an old burned scar climbing beneath his cuff. He noticed me noticing. He lowered his sleeve. No explanation, no story. Only the fact of damage and how quickly he buried it. Outside, raised voices cut through the church door. Luca appeared at the aisle at once. "Phone dump from Carlo's office," he said to Dante. One number repeats Vittorio Saracino. I did not know the name. Dante did. Everything in him became still enough to hurt. "Of course," he said, not loud, worse. Luca's eyes flicked to me, then back. "There's more. Your route to her apartment was leaked before we left the house." The back of my neck went cold. "From inside," Giulia answered from the side aisle. "Looks that way." So the fast mystery closed and another one opened beneath it. Someone inside Dante's world had told the outside where we were going. Someone close enough to hear. On the church steps, rain thickened. One of the men lifted the gray sheet from Carlo's face for the coroner, then covered him again. Dante stood. "We move houses," he said. I rose too. "What about my notebook?" He looked at me a moment too long. "I'll get it. I'm coming." "No, stop saying that like it settles everything." He stepped nearer. The bells had stopped. The church was so quiet, I could hear the wet fabric of his coat when he moved. "If there's a man inside my house feeding roots to Vittorio," he said, "then I need to know whether he fears me more than he wants whatever he's being paid. If I bring you into that equation right now, somebody dies in front of you." I swallowed hard. "That's not a threat," he said. "It's logistics." I should have said something sharp, sensible, defiant. Instead, I stared at the burn scar still hidden beneath his sleeve and thought about a man who could speak of death with the same tone Maria used for inventory. He was not a monster exactly. That was becoming its own kind of problem. As he turned away, his hand brushed mine in the narrow pew line. It could have been an accident. It did not feel like one, and he did not let it linger. That was the fourth almost. He left me on the chapel steps under Luca's umbrella, rain spitting off the stone, while men moved around his orders like blood answering a heart. For the first time since Belladonna, I understood the shape of his world. It was not chaos. It was order built over a pit. The safe house Giulia moved me to that afternoon belonged to nobody on paper, and everybody in practice. It sat above a black lake under a line of pine trees, cedar-sided and too quiet, with a boathouse at the edge of the water and a generator that hummed beneath the floorboards like a second pulse. The windows were thick, the locks were hidden. The kitchen was better stocked than my apartment had ever been, which felt both generous and sinister. Maria had sent food. Of course she had. There was a covered tray of arancini on the counter, a pot of tomato broth warming on low heat, and a note in sharp blue ink that read, "If men start a war before dinner, they can lose blood on their own time." I stood over the note longer than necessary. Giulia came in behind me and set my father's notebook on the table. My breath caught. It was the green one, scuffed cloth cover. Sugar stuck in the spine from a spill 5 years ago. His handwriting on the first page, Bellini pastry, Sunday prep. The sight of it made my throat hurt. "Your apartment was searched," Giulia said. "Drawers out, mattress cut, nothing taken because whatever they wanted was this." I touched the cover with 2 fingers. "Did you hurt anyone getting it?" Her mouth flickered. I didn't have to, which meant someone else had. I sat at the table and opened the notebook. Butter ratios, proofing times, anise biscotti. Cannoli shells with my father's, annoyed marginalia, about humidity and incompetent suppliers. It smelled faintly like cocoa and the old apartment above the bakery, where he used to work nights, while I fell asleep under a prep table, listening to trays slide into ovens. "I don't see anything," I said. "You will." Giulia leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. "You look at it like a daughter. Try looking at it like a man hiding from other men. That sounds exhausting." "It is." A car door shut outside. Something in her posture changed. Not fear, readiness. Dante came in without hurrying, coat damp at the shoulders, Luca behind him carrying a flat storage box and a file. The room tightened around his entrance the same way it always did. He took his lighter from his pocket, clicked it once, then set it on the table beside the notebook like a claim marker. The sound moved through me before I could stop it. Dante noticed that too. His eyes flicked to my face. "Anyone trouble you?" "No." "Anyone call?" "My phone is still in your pocket, so not personally." A shadow of something almost human passed through Luca's expression. Giulia looked determinedly elsewhere. Dante put the file on the table. "Carlo is dead. The councilman's son has disappeared. And the number Carlo called before he died belongs to a shipping company Vittorio uses 3 names away from his own. So we're done pretending this is small." I stared at the notebook. "And my father?" Dante did not answer right away. That told me enough to hate the answer before I got it. "He handled supply routes for Belladonna before you were born," he said. "Flour, sugar, imported spirits, but routes move more than food. Men use familiar systems for unfamiliar money. You think he was laundering for your family. I think he was recording something he didn't trust." I turned pages too quickly, anger making me clumsy. "He baked for 14 hours a day. He came home smelling like yeast and burnt sugar. He was not some bookkeeper with a whisk," Nico said from the hallway. I hadn't heard him arrive. He stood there with his medical bag in one hand and a bruised peach in the other, as if he had wandered into organized crime by mistake and stayed for the fruit. "What are you doing here?" Giulia asked. "Checking on Luca's shoulder, preventing Dante from becoming a martyr to untreated blood pressure and bringing optimism." He held up the peach. "This one survived the drive. Maria must have sent him too, or the universe had a taste for timing. Luca muttered, "Nobody shot my shoulder." "Yet," Nico said. "You people plan ahead so poorly." Despite everything, the room loosened a fraction. Dante looked at Nico with the patience of a man who had tried and failed to fire him in 3 different years. I went back to the notebook. This time I slowed down. My father always corrected recipes in a pattern. Not random notes, little triangles around numbers, flourishes under temperatures, dots beside measurements. When I was a child, he used to tell me that pastry only looked soft. Really, it was math in a silk dress. I found the first pattern in a sfogliatelle recipe, 3 dots beside the flour weight, a slash under the butter, a little triangle near the bake time. Weights. Dates, dock numbers, my skin went cold. "No," I whispered. Dante stepped closer. "What?" I turned the notebook toward him. "These aren't corrections. They're stacks." He bent over the page, shoulder near mine, smelling faintly of rain and the colder note of his cologne beneath it. Luca came to the other side. Giulia moved behind me. The air changed around us, all attention and breath. "My father grouped recipes by season," I said. "Christmas, Lent, weddings, feast days, but the margins only shift in the winter section. Heavy shipments, flour, sugar, imported citrus." "Cocaine," Luca said. "And cash," Giulia added. I flipped faster, another page, another coded cluster, then one that wasn't about money at all. It was a recipe for hazelnut cake I had never seen him make. Beside the sugar line he had written, R tried to stop it. "Tell her if I can't." The room disappeared. "R," I said blankly. "Who is R?" Dante went so still it looked painful. For a second nobody spoke. Then Nico, unusually quiet now, set the peach down on the counter and left the room without a joke. "Dante," I said. He looked at the words, not at me. "Rosa," my chest tightened. "Your sister." He did not ask how I knew he had a sister. Maybe because grief had already said it for him. "She died in the warehouse fire," he said. The lake outside gave a soft slap against the dock. Somewhere in the wall the generator hummed on. "My father knew," I asked. "He knew enough to be afraid. And Vittorio was there." Dante's voice turned flat. "I was. That was all, no explanation, no excuse." The silence behind the words was worse than any speech could have been. I should not have reached for him. I knew better. But grief recognizes itself faster than sense does, and before I thought it through, my fingers brushed the back of his hand where it rested near the notebook. He looked down at them. I could have pulled away. I didn't. He turned his hand once, very slightly enough that my fingertips rested against his knuckles instead of the table. That was all. It still felt like standing too close to a ledge. Then he took his hand back. That was the 5th almost. "I need the whole book decoded tonight," Giulia said softly. I nodded because I could not trust my voice. We worked for 2 hours. Pages, symbols, dock routes disguised as wedding cakes, payouts hidden inside cannoli yields. One set of entries repeating under Vittorio's fronts, another under names I recognized from Belladonna deliveries. My father had not just laundered, he had documented, carefully, quietly. Like a man leaving breadcrumbs for someone brave enough to starve for the truth. At some point Dante set a glass of water beside my elbow without saying anything. At some point I drank it. At some point I realized only 4 people had known about this house. Dante, Giulia, Luca, and Renzo Viri, the family accountant, because Luca mentioned he had approved the off-book maintenance. I closed the notebook slowly. "What is it?" Dante asked. I looked up. "If the route to the church leaked, and the route to this house can leak too, then it isn't just someone listening." Giulia understood first. "It's someone trusted." Outside, tires crunched over gravel. Luca went for his gun before the sound finished. Dante lifted his lighter, listened to it click, and looked toward the door. Someone had come to the lake uninvited. The first shot hit the front window before anybody reached the hallway. Glass burst inward in a glittering sheet. Giulia shoved me off the chair, so hard the floor knocked the breath from me. Luca was already returning fire through the broken pane, all economy and recoil. Dante dragged the kitchen table onto its side one-handed and dropped behind it beside me. "Stay down," he said. I almost told him I had no competing plan. Another shot cracked through the cedar wall. The house gave a low, ugly groan. Back entrance, Giulia snapped. There are 2 at the dock, Luca said. Maybe 3. Dante looked at me once. In that one glance, he measured everything. The notebook under my hand, the line of the hallway, the distance to the rear stairs, whether I was about to freeze. Then he took the notebook, shoved it inside his coat, and pressed his gun into Luca's free hand. Take the west tree line, he said. Giulia with you. And you? Giulia asked. Dante's answer did not change. Boathouse. With me. The thought arrived fully formed before I did anything useful with it. Smoke started somewhere to the left, not fire yet. Just the warning of it, bitter and electrical. My lungs seized on instinct. Kitchen fire, warehouse fire, church bells, men shouting. My body did not sort memories by year when it panicked. Dante saw that too. He cupped the back of my neck, firm enough to anchor, and put his forehead almost against mine without touching. Not then, he said. Now, I breathed because he gave me a place to do it. Then he pulled me up and ran. The rear stairs led straight into rain. The lake had turned black and wind-torn, waves slapping the dock in hard, cold strikes. We sprinted low across wet planks while shots cracked from the tree line. Dante kept his body between mine and the open yard with an instinct so practiced it frightened me more than the gunfire. Halfway to the boathouse, I stumbled. He caught me at the waist. Heat. Strength, one impossible second where my whole body remembered exactly how large he was. He set me right immediately. That was the 6th almost. Inside the boathouse it smelled like gasoline, wet rope, old wood, and lake water forced into corners by weather. Dante shoved the sliding door half-closed, checked the side window, and listened. The storm made everything louder and less clear. Rain on the roof. Men shouting names I didn't know. A motor somewhere too far out on the water. We can take the boat, I whispered. No, you really only have one answer to everything. His mouth shifted very slightly. Not everything. A bullet punched through the wall 3 feet from my shoulder. I flinched into him before I could stop myself. His hand went to my upper arm and stayed there a beat too long. Easy, shiver, warmer this time, not soft, but not cold. Outside, Giulia shouted. Luca answered, then a man screamed once and stopped. Dante moved to the window slit. When I say run, you get into the lower compartment of the boat and do not come out unless you hear my voice. No, he turned. I hated that I could feel my fear trying to make me smaller again. I hated him a little for seeing it every time. No, I repeated, I can help. With what? I looked around. Rope, fuel, a wall rack of tools. On the shelf, a tin of marine flares. With that, his gaze followed mine and changed. Not surprised that I could see an option, something darker. Approval, maybe, and the way it unsettled him. Can you light one? I grew up with ovens that had pilot lights older than me. He took the flare tin down and handed me 2. His fingers brushed my palm deliberately this time, as if passing me danger also meant passing me trust. On my count, he said. Shots hit the dock outside. The boat rocked hard in its cradle. Dante kicked the side door open and fired twice. A man dropped out of view with a sound I felt in my stomach. Dante grabbed my wrist, not tenderly, not roughly, just absolutely, and pulled me toward the launch ramp. Now, I struck the flare against the edge rail. It hissed to life in violent red light, spraying sparks and smoke. I threw it past the dock toward the fuel barrels stacked against the far post. It landed short. Damn it! The second one lit hotter in my hand. Dante fired again. Men were moving through the rain, dark shapes and muzzle flashes. I stepped out farther than he wanted, saw the exact slick plank I needed, and threw with everything I had. The flare hit the barrel lip and dropped behind it. A second later, fire bloomed orange under the storm. The blast was not enormous. It didn't need to be. The sound alone scattered the men at the dock, and the flash bought Dante the 3 clean seconds he needed. He shoved me into the lower compartment under the boat's console, then dropped in after me when bullets hit the windshield above. The space was too small. My knees bent against fiberglass. His shoulder blocked the opening. Rain drummed on the hull. My heartbeat had nowhere to go except into him. "You disobeyed with remarkable timing," he said quietly. "You're welcome." "Debatable," I laughed once. It came out shaky. His hand lifted, stopped halfway to my face, then closed into a fist against his own thigh instead. That was restraint. The first one I fully understood. We stayed like that while the fire outside burned itself down into smoke and panic. His breathing was controlled. Mine was not. The compartment smelled like lake water and fuel, and the cedar-cold scent of him filling all the air I had. "I know why," he said suddenly. I blinked. "Why what?" A beat. "Why you stayed at that table." I couldn't see his whole face in the dim compartment, only the line of it, close enough that if either of us moved wrong— "You were afraid," he said. "And you still wouldn't let them send the other girl." My throat closed. "Most people," he went on, voice almost inaudible under the rain, "become crueler when they're frightened." "Smaller in the worst way, you didn't." He should not have said it there, in the dark, in a space too narrow for lies. "I wasn't brave," I whispered. "No," his mouth was very near mine now, but he did not touch me. "That's not what I said." Outside, Giulia shouted the all clear. Neither of us moved. Then I made the mistake. I looked at his mouth and he saw me do it. Something broke across his face, not composure, not exactly, but the cost of holding it. His thumb touched the edge of my jaw once, barely there, and then he shut his eyes like the contact hurt him. "If I kiss you now," he said, "you'll think it's because you survived." I could not make my body lean back. "What if it is?" I asked. The words cost me. They felt like stepping out without a railing. His hand tightened once against the fiberglass. "That's precisely the problem." He pulled away first, climbed out. Offered me his hand like a gentleman, if gentlemen came with blood on their cuffs and smoke in their lungs. I took it. On the dock, Luca was bleeding from the shoulder after all. Nico was kneeling beside him, cursing the entire invention of ammunition. "I specifically asked for a quiet week," Nico said. "For my digestion." Giulia turned to Dante. This was Carlo's loose ends. This was coordinated. Dante looked past the lake toward the tree line where the last of the men had vanished. His face gave nothing back. "Then Vittorio just declared war," he said, and the night answered with thunder. Dante in the dark under the boat, with smoke in his lungs and her breath trembling against his throat, he had wanted one unforgivable thing. Not her body, not even her mouth. He had wanted to be the first thing she reached for when the shooting started, and he hated himself for how much relief it gave him that, for one stunned second on the dock, she had. War did not arrive like a movie. It arrived like logistics. Phones that never stopped vibrating. Men sleeping in chairs with guns under newspapers. Belladonna closed for renovations, while armored SUVs idled half a block away. Maria making trays of lasagna for grieving soldiers, as if grief and starch had always belonged together. Giulia pinning route maps to a study wall, with the precision of a surgeon setting bone. By the second day, I understood something ugly and useful. Violence in Dante's world was rarely loud when it mattered most. Mostly it was paperwork, silence, and men who stopped coming home. Luca was in surgery. The bullet in his shoulder had shattered more than Nico liked. He had said the phrase "nerve damage" in the hospital stairwell, and then immediately begun insulting the lighting, because he only ever got gentler by becoming ruder. "I trained for medicine," he told me while washing his hands for the fourth time, "not to sew brick walls back together." "He'll live?" I asked. Nico glanced at me in the mirror. Yes, that yes came faster than the others ever did. I believed it because he wanted me to. I sat in the corridor outside the operating room under fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly dead already. My borrowed sweater smelled faintly of detergent and smoke from the lake house. Dante was at the far end of the hall speaking softly into his phone. Two men stood near the elevator pretending not to be armed. Giulia handed me a paper cup of terrible coffee. "Drink. I hate hospital coffee." "Good, it means you're still capable of preference." I looked toward Dante. "Does he always get quieter when it's bad?" "Yes, that seems backwards." "It is." Giulia folded her arms. Loud men want witnesses, quiet men have decided. A child cried somewhere down the hall. A machine beeped twice behind a closed door. My body felt wrung out and too alert at the same time. I said, I could leave. Giulia did not react, which made it easier to keep talking. I have a passport, a little savings, an aunt in Connecticut who still sends me postcards with saints on them. If you put me on a train today, I could disappear by dinner. You could. The simplicity of it made me turn. That's all, she met my eyes. Sophia, if you stay because you think you can't leave, it will rot you from the inside. So yes, you could. I stared at the coffee lid. Would he let me? He would make sure you got there alive. A beat. He would hate every mile of it. That should not have warmed me. It did. Then the operating room doors opened, and Nico came out stripping off his gloves. He looked tired in the way only competent men do, precisely tired, every motion still functioning. He's alive, Nico said before anybody could ask. He will survive because unfortunately stubbornness is stored in connective tissue. I laughed and almost cried at the same time. Nico pointed at me. Absolutely not. If you start, I start, and nobody here has time for my emotional collapse. Maria, who had appeared with a thermos and a plastic container, somehow despite nobody telling me she was coming, smacked his arm. Drink water. Your tenderness is overwhelming. My tenderness is in the soup. The relief in the corridor was brief, almost obscene. Men took breaths they had been hoarding. Giulia closed her eyes once. Dante walked toward us and stopped only when he reached Nico. You'll have movement, he asked. Eventually, Nico said, after pain, swearing, and rehabilitation. In that order, Dante nodded. Good, that was all. But I watched Nico understand that it meant more, and watched Maria understand that Nico understood. And suddenly, all of them felt like people who had learned to speak around a wound too old to name directly. Then Dante's phone buzzed. He answered, listened, said nothing. When he ended the call, the corridor cooled 10 degrees. What? Giulia asked. Belladonna's bakery entrance. His voice stayed even. A body, left for her. I did not realize he meant me until everyone looked at me at once. The cup slid out of my hand and hit the floor. They had left a dead man at the place where I used to pipe cream into cannoli shells and argue with the dishwasher about radio stations. It was not random anymore, not proximity, not collateral. This was because of me, or for me. In his world, those might have been the same thing. I need air, I said. Nobody tried to stop me. The stairwell smelled like bleach and wet wool. I leaned against the cinderblock wall and pressed my fist against my mouth until I could breathe without making noise. The door opened again. Dante came in alone. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The fluorescent light made the burn scar at his wrist more visible where his sleeve had ridden up. He looked less like a king here than he did in his suits and restaurants. More dangerous, maybe, because hospitals stripped everyone down to what mattered. I can leave, I said. He took that in without flinching. Yes. I waited for the no, for the order. For the command that would turn this into a prison and make the decision easy by making it not mine. It never came. You should, I said, and hated the shake in my voice. That's what sensible people would tell me. I'm not sensible. No, his mouth almost moved. I looked at the floor. If I stay, people get hurt. If you go, people still get hurt. That's not comforting. It isn't meant to be. There it was again, the terrible thing about him. He refused me false softness even when it would have made him easier to love. I did not call it love. I knew better. But some feelings arrive before they've been properly named. I saw you in the boathouse, I said quietly. I saw what you become. His face shut. And I still came down the stairs when the shooting stopped, I added. So maybe I should be afraid of myself. He looked at me then, fully, no distance left. That, he said, is the first honest thing either of us has said today. Silence. Then, because the whole world had already broken open, and I was tired of pretending my life still fit inside the old shape. I reached into my bag and took out the envelope I had kept folded there for 3 months. The apprenticeship letter, Paris. 6 months with a pastry chef I had wanted to study under since I was 19. I held it between us. I was supposed to answer by next week. Something changed in his eyes, not surprise, the understanding of cost. You didn't tell me. You didn't ask. A long beat. Then I tore it in half. The sound was small. Paper, nothing more. It still felt like a bone breaking somewhere invisible. Dante's hand twitched at his side as if he meant to stop me and arrived too late inside himself. This is not for you, I said, though maybe part of it was. It's for me. I need to know if I stay because I walked in with my eyes open. I dropped the pieces into the hospital trash. My future did not disappear all at once. It made a soft paper sound and became a different one. When I looked up, his composure had cracked by the smallest possible fraction. That was the 7th almost. I can have Giulia take you to the station, he said. I stared at him. Then I brushed past him, opened the stairwell door, and walked back toward the corridor where his wounded men waited, and Maria was probably insulting the vending machines, and Nico was pretending not to pray. I chose the darkness with open eyes. When Dante followed, he did not touch me. He didn't need to. I had already turned back in on my own. The next 48 hours moved like a fever. I slept in pieces, ate when Maria cornered me with broth, helped Giulia decode the remaining notebook pages on a dining table covered in shipping manifests and photographs. Vittorio's routes began to take shape through my father's recipes, winter deliveries through Red Hook, cash moved under citrus invoices. A cold storage warehouse in Jersey tied to names Dante recognized and refused to explain until the explanation could be weaponized. That was his way. Information in his hands was never conversation. It was ammunition with manners. By the 3rd night, I insisted on going back to Belladonna. You're joking, Giulia said. I know the kitchen. I know the back corridor. If Vittorio left that body there for a reason, I want to see what he wanted seen. Dante was by the study window, lighter clicking softly against his thumb. No, I turned on him. You have got to expand your emotional vocabulary. Nico, sprawled in an armchair with Luca's rehab schedule in one hand and a protein bar in the other, said. I've been saying this for years. Dante ignored him. It's exposed. So am I that landed harder than I meant it to. The room went quiet. Giulia looked between us. She's right. Dante's gaze shifted to her with the calm of a man filing future arguments for later destruction. Dangerously so. And still right, she said. In the end, he let me go because the notebook indicated one missing page had been removed recently, and Belladonna's pastry office was the only place my father might have hidden a duplicate. We arrived after midnight through the service entrance. The kitchen smelled wrong, bleach over old fryer oil over the ghost of bread. A place scrubbed too hard after something ugly. I found the duplicate page taped beneath a flour bin in less than 6 minutes. I also found the man waiting behind me. The freight elevator doors slid shut before I could scream. A hand went over my mouth. Another took the page. Careful, a voice said near my ear. You're worth more unbruised. He smelled like clove cigarettes and cold leather, not one of Dante's men. Younger, nervous underneath the confidence, I bit him, hard. He swore and slammed me against the metal wall, then laughed like pain impressed him. There she is. The elevator moved down. By the time the doors opened, 2 more men were waiting in the basement, loading bay with zip ties and instructions not to damage my face. Men always said things like that, as if a body were a rental property. They took me to a cold storage facility across the river. I knew because I counted turns, bridges, and the exact change in air when water moved close. The room they put me in smelled like iron shelves, machine coolant, and oranges stored too long. 1 bare bulb, 1 chair, 1 camera in the corner. Vittorio Saracino came in an hour later. He was beautiful in the way some knives are beautiful, dark suit, silver at the temples. A smile made entirely of memory and appetite. He looked like a man who had once been loved too easily and never recovered into decency. So, he said, sitting across from me. This is the girl. I said nothing. He tilted his head. Dante always did have exquisite timing. The moment he finally grows a heart, I get someone to threaten. I kept my face still because that line was meant to open me, and I refused him the satisfaction. He noticed. "Good," he said softly. "You understand silence, that's rarer than innocence. You knew my father." His eyes warmed with amusement. "There she is. You killed him." Vittorio sighed like I had accused him of poor taste. "Your father made the mistake of believing information becomes morality if you write it down neatly enough. And Rosa?" Something changed then, brief, real. "Rosa," he repeated. That was the tragedy. The way he said it scared me more than denial would have. The door opened behind him. Renzo Viri stepped in. For one impossible second my mind refused the shape. Renzo, the accountant with the soft hands, the grandfather face. The man who had brought ledgers and fruit to the hospital, and once told me my father's brioche was overrated in a way that made me laugh. He could not quite meet my eyes. No, no. Vittorio watched the realization arrive and seemed to enjoy the pace of it. "Trusted men are the only kind worth buying," Renzo said. "My daughter has 2 children. That was his explanation. Not greed, not ambition, fear with a face on it. It did not make the betrayal smaller, it made it sadder in a way I could not forgive. "You leaked the church route," I said. He nodded once. "The lake house." Another nod. His mouth shook when he tried to speak again. "He had Alyssa. Vittorio had her for 11 days. You think Dante would have traded the account books for my family?" "He would have called it necessary." Vittorio smiled faintly. "He knows me. What Dante would have done with that choice I did not know. That was part of the cruelty." In his world, love and strategy kept ending up on opposite sides of the table. Vittorio leaned in. "I need the rest of the notebook from his coat." "You're going to tell me where he keeps it?" I looked at him, then I laughed. It surprised all 3 of us, not because anything was funny. Because Nico once said panic and humor were cousins. And suddenly, I heard his horrified voice in my head complaining about industrial refrigeration, and my fear missed the turn it meant to take. Vittorio's smile thinned. "Why is that amusing?" "Because you think," I said, "that if Dante had a weakness, he would keep it in his coat." Renzo flinched before Vittorio did. That told me everything I needed to know about who understood Dante better. Vittorio stood. "Leave us." When the door shut behind Renzo, he knelt in front of me and took my chin in elegant fingers. "You're shaking." "Yes, and still insolent. I begin to see the appeal." I met his eyes. "No, you don't." For the first time, he looked angry. Good. I held onto that like a nail in a wall. Hours later, the traitor was still not my whole problem, because the slow mystery had not finished opening yet. Vittorio knew too much about Rosa, about my father, about the fire itself. Enough that there had been no accident in any version of that story. The bulb buzzed overhead. Somewhere beyond the wall, a freight gate rolled open. Then, from very far off, I heard it. One soft metallic click, a lighter. My entire body went still. Vittorio heard it too. His expression changed by half a degree. The next sound was gunfire in the corridor. Too late had arrived. And then it turned. The first man through the door died before his body finished entering. Vittorio moved fast, faster than his age suggested, dragging me and the chair sideways just as the bullet hit the wall where his head had been. The camera shattered. Glass fell in a glittering rain. Somewhere outside, the room men were shouting in Italian and cursing in English, which meant Dante's people had met Vittorio's in a place too small for diplomacy. Vittorio drew a gun from his ankle and pressed it briefly under my jaw. "Tell him to stop," he said. I almost smiled. If he knew Dante at all, he knew how useless that request was. The door slammed open again. Not Dante this time. Renzo, his face gray, gun shaking in his hand. "Back stair," he shouted. "Now." Vittorio took one look at him and understood before I did. Betrayal inside betrayal. Renzo had sold Dante for his daughter, but he had not sold me all the way. He had stalled, leaked a delayed route, left a minute where none should have been. Vittorio saw the fracture and shot him. The sound erased the room. Renzo hit the floor hard, hand flying to his stomach. I screamed before I knew I had. Vittorio swung the gun back toward me, distracted for one stupidly merciful second by his own rage. I drove the metal chair leg into his knee. He went down with a sound that was almost surprised. I ran, not beautifully, not cleverly. Zip ties still around one wrist, chair bruises in my back, breath tearing through me. But I ran. The corridor outside was all cold white light and stacked orange crates. A man in a black jacket came around the corner, and I threw the nearest thing I had, a plastic bin of citrus. Oranges exploded across the floor under his boots. He slipped. I kept going. That was survival, not grace. I would take it. At the end of the corridor, I found a prep room with industrial counters and a blast chiller humming in the wall. On the shelf, salt, sugar, vinegar, cleaning alcohol. My father's notebook had taught me one thing beyond pastry, that kitchens are chemistry for people who can't afford laboratories. I ripped open a sack of flour, dumped it across the tile near the doorway, then grabbed the cleaning alcohol and sloshed it over the threshold and the base of the shelving unit. Not enough to blow the room, enough to blind, burn, and buy time. The handle moved. I struck a match from the emergency kit by the sink and held it over the wet line. "Come in," I said, voice shaking so badly it almost sounded calm. The door stayed shut. Good. A second later, gunfire erupted farther down the corridor. Close now, very close. Then the knob turned again and Dante's voice came through the door. "Shiver!" Everything in me went liquid with relief and terror at once. I yanked it open. He filled the doorway, coat half gone, blood on one cuff that was not all his, face set in the terrible stillness he wore when tenderness would have interfered with killing. Behind him, Luca stood pale but upright, shoulders strapped, fury keeping him vertical. Nico, absurdly, was also there in a bulletproof vest and no helmet, holding a medical kit and muttering what sounded like a prayer against everyone's stupidity. Dante looked at the flour, the alcohol, the match in my hand, and then at me. "You threatened a fire," he said. "I grew up around bakers." Something flashed in his eyes so raw it nearly undid me. Then he stepped inside and put both hands on my face as if checking whether I was real enough to stay. The reunion was not a kiss. It was worse. It was the way his forehead touched mine for one single second, before he remembered who he was in front of witnesses, and let me go. That was the eighth almost, and it hurt more than the others because now I knew exactly what it was keeping back. "You're bleeding," I whispered. "Not enough to matter." Nico leaned around him. "I disagree professionally and spiritually." Luca glanced at Renzo's body down the corridor and swore under his breath. He turned. "Halfway," I said. Dante's face gave nothing. But he closed his eyes once, very briefly, when he saw Renzo. That was the cost, not just of betrayal, of the kind of life where even mercy arrived late and complicated. "Vittorio?" he asked. "Back stair." Dante looked at Luca. Luca nodded before the order came. Men who had grown up together did that, or men who had survived each other long enough to count it the same thing. "I'm not staying here," I said. "You are," Dante answered. "No." His gaze snapped to mine. I heard my own pulse, the cold hum of the room. Nico whispering to Luca not to flex because apparently even raids had posture critiques now. "He took me because I matter to this," I said. "I know what he wants. I know what he thinks he can use. You matter to this because of me." "Yes," I swallowed. "And I'm done pretending that's a reason to stand in a corner." For one stretched second, I thought he would forbid it. Instead, he reached into his coat and took out the missing notebook page Vittorio had stolen from me. He had recovered it already. "You stay between Luca and Nico," he said. That was not permission. It was the shape permission takes when spoken by men like him. We moved through the warehouse together. The final cold room was on the upper loading level. Vittorio had one man left and a truck idling at the dock. He stood under a hanging bulb with his bad knee half bent and the gun steady anyway. "Brother," he said when he saw Dante. There it was. Not blood brother, worse, chosen and ruined. Dante stopped 6 feet away. "You set the fire." Vittorio smiled without warmth. "I set many fires." Rosa, the name changed the air. Vittorio's eyes flicked to me, then back. She was not supposed to stay. Something inside Dante turned to ice so complete I felt it from where I stood. And Bellini? Dante asked. Your baker tried to pull her out, Vittorio said. Noble men are exhausting. I heard my own breath leave me. My father had not just known, he had tried. The slow mystery finished opening in the ugliest possible shape. Vittorio raised the gun. You could have been me, Dante. You simply had better timing. No, Dante said. The word landed like judgment. Gunfire cracked. Men moved. The bulb burst. I dropped hard, hands over my head, while the room became sound and splinters and shouted names. Somewhere in it Dante made a noise I had never heard from him before, nothing like rage, nothing human enough to name cleanly. When it stopped, Vittorio was still breathing. Barely. Dante stood over him with the gun low at his side and blood running from a cut at his temple into one eye. Luca had the truck driver face down. Nico was already cursing over somebody's shoulder wound in the corner. I looked at Dante and understood we were one step from losing something that would not come back if he took it. He looked at me too, and for the first time both of us knew one of us might not survive what came next, not the bullets, the choice. The last battle should probably sound heroic. It was. It was wet concrete, failing lights, the copper stink of blood, and Vittorio laughing with one lung collapsing, because some men would rather die performing themselves than surrender to silence. Dante stood over him with the gun low, and I saw it then with a clarity that made my stomach turn. Vittorio really was the mirror, not because they were the same. Because one more wrong choice in the wrong fire had once been enough to make them possible to confuse. You loved her, Vittorio said, blood threading from the corner of his mouth. And still you came late. Dante did not move. Luca had his weapon trained on the driver. Nico knelt over Renzo, who had been dragged in alive somehow, barely conscious, shirt soaked through. Giulia arrived with the second team seconds later, coat open over her holster, face white with the speed of the drive and the effort of not showing it. It's contained, she said, then saw Vittorio and stopped. Vittorio looked at her and smiled. Ferrero! Don't, she said. That single word carried history I did not know. Another mystery, maybe. Not one the night would solve. Vittorio's gaze went back to Dante. You want the truth? Your father signed the order. I lit the match. Bellini got in the way. Rosa should have gone home when I told her, but she stayed because she thought you were worth waiting for. No one breathed. I looked at Dante. The color had left his face so completely he seemed carved from the same concrete under our shoes. His father, not just Vittorio, not just greed in a rival warehouse. Family. That was what victory was going to cost him. Not a man, a belief, maybe the last one. You're lying, I said, because I wanted somebody in the room to be. Vittorio laughed, coughed blood, and looked almost gentle in his ruin. Ask the ledger's little baker. Bellini wrote more than roots. Giulia took the notebook from Dante's coat where it had shifted open during the fight, flipped pages, found the back leaf. Her mouth tightened. It's there, she said quietly. Dante did not ask to see it. Maybe because he already knew in the deep animal place where children keep the truth about their parents long before they can speak it. Vittorio watched that understanding land and mistook the stillness for weakness. Men like him always did. You can kill me, he said, then inherit what made me. Dante lifted the gun. Every muscle in my body locked. This was it. The line. The place where people were made or unmade and nobody got to stay innocent of the choosing. I heard the lighter before I saw it. Dante had taken it from his pocket in the same motion. Old silver, scratched edges, Rose's lighter I realized suddenly, not a habit, a relic. He clicked it once. The room went very quiet. Then he looked at Luca. Take Sophia out. No, I said instantly. Dante did not even turn his head. Now, Luca moved toward me. I stepped back. No. This time Dante looked at me. Blood at his temple, burned scar at his wrist. Eyes so dark they looked almost hollow with restraint. He was giving me one last chance not to see what came next. I loved him then. Not because he was good. Not because he was safe. Because even here, with his brother mirror bleeding at his feet, some part of him still wanted to carry the ugliest thing alone. That part undid me. "I'm staying," I said. He closed his eyes once. When he opened them, the decision had already been made. He crouched in front of Vittorio and held up the lighter between them. "Rosa waited with this in her hand," he said. "Did she ask for me?" For the first time all night, Vittorio looked uncertain. "She asked if I was coming," Dante said, as if answering the question himself from a place that had never stopped hearing it. Bellini tried to get her out. "You barred the side door." Vittorio smiled with half a mouth. "So you did know," Dante nodded. "Enough." He stood, handed the lighter to me, and shot Vittorio once through the heart. No speech. No second shot. No spectacle. Efficiency more disturbing than rage. Vittorio died with surprise still visible in his face. The warehouse seemed to exhale around us. Nico was the first to move. Good. Lovely. Everyone alive enough to leave do so. I am refusing to spend dawn in a refrigerated murder museum. Renz caught my sleeve as I turned. His hand was slippery with his own blood. His eyes, when they found mine, were full of an apology too late to become useful. "Elissa," he whispered. Giulia bent at once. "We have her." He looked at Dante next. Whatever passed there was too old and exhausted for me to translate. Renzo had betrayed him. Renzo had also bent the betrayal just enough that we reached the warehouse alive. Nothing about it resolved cleanly. "Take care of them," Renzo said. Then he died. Outside, dawn was just starting to press gray into the river fog. Men loaded bodies into vans with the same silent competence they loaded crates. A gull screamed overhead like something being torn. Giulia stood beside me while the air tasted of diesel and wet rust. "Your father left more than the notebook," she said. "There's a key to a deposit box under Belladonna's old safe. We'll retrieve it after sunrise." I nodded. Dante came out last. He had washed Vittorio's blood off his hands. Not all of it. The cut at his temple still marked him, so did something I could not name and had no right to ask him to make easier for me. For a long moment we only looked at each other. Then he held out his hand. I put Rose's lighter into it. His fingers closed around mine at the same time. Not an accident, not a public claim. Just contact, unmistakable and brief. That was not an almost. That was real. He let go first because the world was still watching. Luca eased into the passenger seat of the first SUV, with Nico complaining beside him about shoulder injuries, medical malpractice, and the moral collapse of men who refused proper rehabilitation. Maria had sent a blanket that someone draped over Giulia's shoulders even though she pretended not to notice. The river moved black under the dock. Dawn widened. "It is over," Dante said. It was. Nothing about that made it simple. War leaves strange debris behind. Not only bodies and invoices and men who stop answering phones, sometimes it leaves practical things. Window repairs at Belladonna. New staff because 3 waiters quit, and 1 disappeared to Atlantic City with a mistress and an alarming amount of petty cash. Luca learning how to work through pain without insulting physical therapy so directly that Nico refused to treat him. Giulia moving entire branches of the Salvator operation away from front businesses that had once seemed untouchable. Maria teaching me which linens belonged to dinners with judges and which were only for priests. 6 weeks after the warehouse, I was back in the pastry kitchen. Not because life had returned to normal. It hadn't. Nothing smelled quite the same anymore. Every back door had a camera, every delivery got checked twice. I still startled when elevators opened too fast, but dough still needed kneading, sugar still needed tempering, butter still softened if you waited long enough. I made lemon cakes for a christening luncheon in the private room and watched the glaze settle under the lights. My hands did not shake. That felt miraculous enough to respect quietly. Nico appeared at the pass with a fork and the tragic expression of a man in love with several impossible things at once. "I'm having a spiritual emergency." "No samples before service," I said. "It's not about cake, though obviously the cake matters." He leaned in. "Maria smiled at me this morning. She smiles at everyone. She threatened me with fennel yesterday. There are levels. I laughed and handed him a broken edge of candied peel because I am not cruel. He ate it with reverence. If she ever agrees to coffee, I'm buying new shoes. You bought those last week. For grief. Was anyone dead? My metabolism. I shook my head and turned back to the cakes. He went quieter then, which on Nico always meant the moment was real. You're steadier. I looked down at the glaze. Am I? Yes, he shrugged. Still sad in places. Still one loud noise from homicide, but steadier. I smiled without meaning to. That is the nicest medical assessment anyone has ever given me. Please. I once told Luca he was structurally disappointing but survivable. A laugh escaped me. It echoed lightly off the steel racks. From the doorway, Dante watched us. He had been doing that more. Not hovering, not interrupting. Just appearing in door frames and looking at me like there was still something he had not solved, and it irritated him to want what he could not command. Today he wore charcoal instead of black. It changed nothing. Nico saw him and immediately straightened. I'm leaving before he assumes I'm flirting outside my tax bracket. You are flirting inside your delusion, I said. Cruelty, he sighed, and vanished with another piece of candied peel when I wasn't looking. Dante came in after he left. The kitchen quieted around him even though nobody else was there. You gave him sugar. He looked terminal. His mouth moved almost into a smile. Almost. That had become its own kind of intimacy between us. The tiny things he no longer hid. The fraction of expression. The slight lowering of his voice when we were alone. The way he said my nickname now as if it belonged more to memory than observation. He stopped beside the counter. Luca says Nico has started doing push-ups. For romance, for Maria, I laughed. Dante watched the sound happen to me with that same unsettling attention he had at the beginning, except now it no longer felt like being cornered. It felt like being held without touch. He reached out, took a streak of glaze from the side of my thumb, and looked at the sugar shining there for 1 second before he put it on a dish towel instead of his mouth. Restraint still, even now. I found the deposit box papers, he said. I set down the spatula. And, your father kept insurance, names, dates, signatures. He held my gaze. Enough to prove he tried to expose the warehouse arrangement before the fire. Something in my chest eased. Not pain, never that neat, but a hard, old shame that had been sitting beside my grief. He wasn't part of it in the end, I whispered. No, I swallowed. Thank you. He looked almost annoyed. Don't thank me for your father's decency. Then for finding it. A beat. For staying, he said. The words were so direct I forgot to breathe. This was the man who had built whole rooms out of what he wouldn't say. And now here he was, standing in my kitchen with sugar on my hand and tiredness under his eyes, saying the thing plain. My heart did something terrible and soft. I nearly didn't, I admitted. I know, did you? Yes, silence. Then he nodded once toward the office. Come with me. The office above Belladonna's private dining room still smelled faintly like old leather, and the spice of cigars no one smoked in here anymore. Evening light lay across the desk. The city moved below the windows in traffic noise and distant sirens. Dante opened the top drawer, took something out, and set it on the desk between us. Not a ring. A small velvet box, closed. I stared at it until my pulse started to climb. This is not a fairy tale, he said. No, I said, because if I said more right then, my voice might fail publicly. He rested one hand on the desk. Not touching the box, not touching me, giving both things the dignity of choice. My world doesn't improve because I want it to, he said. It stays dangerous. Men still come to me with blood on their sleeves and debts in their mouths. I will still do things you cannot admire. Some of them you shouldn't. He paused. That alone told me how costly the next part would be. But if there is any life in it, I can build that isn't only punishment, he said quietly. I want to build it with you. I stared at him. No grand speech. No kneeling. No polished romance designed to make the fear disappear. Just the truth, standing there with all its sharp edges left on. He opened the box. Inside was a ring set with an old-fashioned oval diamond. Not enormous. the kind chosen by a man who understood beauty better in restraint than display. On the inside band, barely visible, was one engraved word: shiver. My eyes burned instantly. Dante saw and went still, as if tears from me still hit him like physical force. "You don't have to answer now," he said. That was when I knew he was afraid, not of refusal exactly, of wanting. I touched the edge of the box with one finger. "Did you really engrave the insult?" "It stopped being an insult months ago." Something inside me broke open and healed in the same motion. "Yes," I whispered. His eyes closed once. When they opened, he took the ring out and looked at my hand before touching it. The way he had looked at every important thing between us, as if permission mattered even when the world claimed otherwise. When he slid it onto my finger, his hand shook. Only once. I felt it because I was the only one close enough to know. Then he bent and pressed his mouth very softly to my knuckles. No witnesses. No spectacle, just reverence where fear used to be. Later, after the office emptied into evening, and Maria shouted from downstairs that civilized people ate before midnight. We stood for a moment at the window, while traffic moved below like a separate species of life. He touched the ring once with his thumb. "You should know," he said, voice low. "Nico already tried to ask whether he can wear green at the wedding because it flatters his resilience." I laughed against his shoulder. "Poor Maria," I said. Dante's hand settled at the back of my neck, warm and steady. "Poor everyone." Outside, the city kept going. Inside, for one impossible ordinary minute, so did we. 9 months later, the kitchen at Belladonna smelled like browned butter, coffee, and oranges. Not the haunted, overscrubbed version from after the war. This one, alive, warm. Loud in the harmless ways, trays sliding into ovens, a radio arguing softly with the exhaust fan, Maria swearing at Basil as if herbs only existed to test her character. Nico in the doorway pretending he had not come downstairs specifically to steal bomboloni while wearing a wedding band, and the self-satisfaction of a man who had somehow survived long enough for Maria to marry him despite every warning sign. "You cannot keep saying for the baby as an excuse," Maria told him. "I'm building paternal softness. You're building a stomach." Their daughter, Lucia, slept in a basket near the office door with one fist tucked under her cheek. Utterly unbothered by organized crime, pastry cream, or her father's melodrama. The ordinariness of that still undid me sometimes. Luca had full use of his arm again, though Nico claimed credit for all miracles in the tri-state area. Giulia ran half the family's legitimate holdings, now and the other half, whenever Dante was smart enough to get out of her way. Belladonna's back room still hosted men who arrived in black coats and left with their lives changed. That part had not become gentler, only clearer. I knew what I had chosen. That knowledge had not poisoned the warmth, it had made it honest. I was boxing pastries for the afternoon charity luncheon when one of the new servers, Mina, 19, wide-eyed, trying too hard not to be, backed into the stainless counter and nearly dropped a tray. "I'm sorry," she said too quickly. "Carlo," she stopped dead, face draining, having used the wrong dead name in the wrong building. The room went still. I knew that stillness now. Knew what fear did inside it. Mina's hands began to shake so badly the silver tongs clicked against the tray. And before Maria or Giulia or anyone else could step in, another server from the floor, older and meaner in the way frightened people sometimes get, said, "If there's a problem, send me up. I can handle Mr. Salvetter." Mina looked ready to cry. My body moved before thought did. "No," I said. The room turned toward me. I crossed to Mina, took the tray from her hands, and heard the tongs rattle once before the metal stilled. She was terrified enough to become selfish if selfishness had lived in her. Instead she whispered, I'm so sorry," as if apology could shrink her out of sight. I knew that shape. I remembered it in my bones. "They sent me," I said quietly. "Not her." The kitchen fell silent in a completely different way. Behind me from the office doorway I heard it, one soft metallic click. Dante, I turned. He was leaning against the frame in shirt sleeves, jacket off, tie missing, lighter in one hand and that unreadable expression he had worn the first night at the back table. Except I could read it now. All of it, the memory, the ache, the exact place my words had landed. Why her? There it was again between us, living and untouched by time. Mina looked from him to me and back, confused by the current she had stepped into by accident. "You'll do the luncheon with Sophia," Dante said to her. No one argued. Mina nodded frantically and fled toward the pastry station with gratitude still catching in her breath. The meaner server found something urgent to do in another room. Maria muttered, "Good," like a verdict. Nico bit into a stolen bombolone and whispered, "I love this house," only to receive a spoon thrown at his shoulder with murderous accuracy by his wife. The kitchen resumed. Dante did not. He waited until the noise covered us and then came closer, stopping at my station where sugar glazed the tops of the orange cakes under the afternoon light. "You did it again," he said. My hands were sticky with syrup. "What?" He set the lighter down on the counter and looked at me with the dangerous, patient focus that had once frightened me because I did not know what it wanted. "Stayed afraid," he said quietly. "And chose someone else first anyway." There were still times I did not know how to answer him. Maybe that was part of staying human with a man like Dante. Not becoming polished enough to ruin the truth, so I said the wrong thing first. "She was just nervous." He shook his head once. "No, Shiver, she was terrified." The nickname landed warm now. So warm it almost hurt. I looked at the cakes because if I looked at him for too long, I would forget how to continue functioning in public. "You noticed that the first night." "I noticed the spoon," I smiled. "Romantic. I wasn't trying to be." "No, that was the problem." A laugh touched his mouth. "Small, real." I picked up the small kitchen torch and began caramelizing the sugar tops one by one. The blue flame hissed softly. The scent of burnt sugar rose into the air, bitter first, then rich. A shell over softness. Still me, just less afraid of being known for it. When I finished the last cake, Dante took the torch from my hand, shut off the flame, and reached for Rose's lighter. For a second my chest tightened in the old reflex of Chapter 1 before I remembered what the sound meant now. He clicked it open. Not danger, not warning, home. Then he leaned in and lit the tiny candle I had set at the center of the smallest cake for Lucia's 9-month day. Because Maria insisted babies deserved ridiculous celebrations, and because in this house we had begun to treat survival as an occasion. The flame steadied. That was the motif closing, though I would never have called it that. To me it was simply this, the same sound, and everything changed. Dante looked at the candle, then at me. "It still costs me," I understood. The noticing, the wanting, the fact that some fears never disappeared, they only stopped being allowed to decide everything. I touched his wrist where the burn scar lived under the cuff. "Good," I said softly. "It should." His hand came to the back of my neck, familiar now, sacred because it had never become casual. He bent and kissed my forehead, right there in the kitchen, while Maria complained about powdered sugar drift, and Nico narrated his own near-death by spoon. The ordinary life we had built did not erase what it stood on. That was why it mattered. Later, when the luncheon ended and the city turned amber outside the windows, I stood alone for a moment in the back room where it had all begun. The white linen was crisp. The crystal caught the light. The chair opposite Dante's place was empty now. I could still hear the spoon. I could still hear the click. Only now neither sound meant I was about to disappear. Only that I had survived long enough to remain myself in a world that had asked for less. Behind me, Dante said, "Come home, Shiver," and I did. Would you have chosen Dante and let the darkness become part of your life too, if it meant saving the parts of him no one else could reach? When Renzo betrayed one family to save another, did he do the right thing, or simply the only thing fear left him? Have you ever loved someone enough to stay, after seeing exactly what their world costs?